Welcome to the Popcorn Junkies. That's an open cupboard door. This is a review of Ti West, that's the director, Ti West's X, simply titled X. It's a horror film. It stars, well, I mean, it has stars in there that you'll know, but they're not massive names. We've got Jenna Ortega, we've got Mia Goth, who I know best, really, and Brittany Snow, who I believe was in Pitch Perfect. And this is really this is like a retro tribute to a retro period of grindhousey slasher movie type horror. The most obvious comparison with this film is something like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was, you know, in the 70s came out, it was a sort of sun-blanched, woozy, sort of rural horror in which, there was no safety in the daylight. And there was that whole sort of Hicksville, hillbilly, inbred stuff going on. It's become a caricature now, but back in the day, highly effective, and there have been many sequels spawned from it. Well, this kind of plays on that topic, and obviously the title X, for those of us who are old enough to remember, there used to be certificates, I don't know if they were the same in America, but certainly in the UK, which was, X or double X for either really horrific or really raunchy sex films. And I think the title X here plays on riffs on a couple of those concepts, because this follows a bunch of actors. Now, when I say a bunch of actors, we're talking amateur sex workers here. We're talking strippers. We're talking about a producer who's played by Martin Henderson, who's absolutely brilliant, who's kind of pulled these girls out of a strip joint and has taken them on the road because he's booked this kind of, this sort of rural ranch type place. He's spoken to the guy who owns it and said, look, can we borrow one of your barns on your land? We've got some stuff we want to do. They don't tell the owner of the barn, obviously, that they're going to shoot a hot adult movie, and that's what they're doing. They're going out to shoot an adult film. Now, before we get into whether you should watch this, see this or not, you've got to like horror films. If you don't like horror films, you're not going to like this. It's full of gore. It's an 18 certificate here in the UK, and in the description it says extreme gore detail. I don't think I've actually seen that in a British Board of Film Classification description. There's a lot of gore. There's a lot of sex, though I have to say it's not explicit sex in the way that we've kind of got used to it elsewhere. The sex is really a vehicle for other sort of scenes of horror. And it follows that age-old sort of narrative, dating back to things like The Evil Dead, where you have a clutch of people, because their moral boundaries and moral sort of values are slightly dubious. You often get in these films, characters who, if they smoke spliff, you kind of know they're marked and they're going to die. If a character has sex, they're kind of marked and they're going to die. There's the character who heads off into the woods, there's the character who heads down into the cellar, there's the character who heads up into the loft. And, when a character is marked by these kind of moral transgressions, if you like, same in Halloween, they become almost, there's a sort of unwritten, old-fashioned horror trope / rule, that they become a just target. They're fair game. They're going to be bait. They're going to be got, and that's all right. We as an audience can sit pretty with having indulged in their moral decrepitude by knowing that they're going to be hacked in half and have their heads squished in some sort of awful way. I think that's the way it rolls. I think the idea is that you can have fun, you can have sex, you can smoke drugs, but there's a price to pay. And in these horror films, there's often a price to pay. Well, what I like about this film is that from the outset, they're all absolutely cloaked, soaked through, and just immersed in questionable moral sort of values, and that they're all wanting to make a sex film. It's an explicit sex film. There's members of the team. Kid Cudi plays the guy who's going to have sex with everyone. There's two women there, Mia Goth and Brittany Snow are the two women, whereas the character played by Jenna Ortega is a boom operator with her boyfriend who's on camera, and I quite like that. There's quite a funny, played by Owen Campbell, there's quite a funny riff going on, that whilst they're all going out there, whilst the producer and the actors are going out there just to have sex, film it, and hopefully break some kind of Hollywood. I don't know if they're going to break Hollywood. The guy on camera, played by Owen Campbell, he believes there's artistry to be had in there. He believes that you can bring cinematic visual skill and artistry even to the act of a couple banging away in a room. And you see plenty of banging in this film. Mia Goth is such a sort of got such a curiously beautiful face. She sort of floats from scene to scene. She sort of wanders in a sort of dungarees. I mean, it's very 70s. It's very, well, it's set in 1979. So, you know, you feel like you're in almost a flake advert. It's that kind of misty, and it's like always in the 70s. There was always kind of hay fevery kind of, there were seeds and there was stuff in the air and stuff like that, wasn't it? So they're in this house, and so really, without going on about it, and I don't want to ruin any of the individual shocks and surprises, this is a horror film, and they slowly, in a sort of really quite gruesome and quite graphic way, get picked off one by one. It's quite a short film, it's not too long, and it's quite an effective film. It does the job well. Its seat of horror, what we discover is that the guy who owns the ranch and has allowed them to sort of rent the barn and what have you, he's a shuffling, bald, slightly creepy, sort of eerie sort of chap, and he keeps referring to his wife, who herself is a really creepy, eerie, weird kind of sort of woman, and it's made all the weirder because this old woman gets a certain frisson of some sorts from the sexual activities of these youngsters. Now, I think it's quite clear, this is a spoiler review, but I'm not going to unpack how everyone dies and how everyone doesn't die. But suffice it to say, I think Mia Goth is playing both characters. There's a clear parallel is drawn between the old and the young. One is one the sort of later aged version of the younger one. What is beauty? At what point does getting old prevent you from having desires and feeling sexual and kind of wanting to be loved and be loved by someone else? And so that's kind of flipped through this. But I have to say, I think probably the weakest aspect of the film is that it does overly rely on the idea of old age being inherently disgusting, frightening, and ugh. It put me in mind of that phrase or that insult that someone says to someone about kissing someone. It was like kissing your grandmother without her teeth in. If that makes your skin crawl, the very concept or saying of that sentence, this film is really going to make your skin crawl, because it traverses that whole thing of generational divides, what old people want from sex, what young people get from sex. And it kind of mines that sort of vein for sort of its horror and for its kind of jump scares and all that kind of stuff. It's very self-knowing. It's very funny at times. It's beautifully shot, brilliantly shot. It's a huge, brilliant genre tribute film. It ends up not being much more than what it sets out to kind of lampoon, in a sense, which is it's a gaggle of kids heading out and terrible things happen to them in a Texas Chainsaw Massacre sort of way. That's what it becomes. What I quite like about it is there's no hierarchy given to the moral transgressions of the various characters that do or don't die. You have to have a stomach for the horror, but even then it's a little bit like the Quentin Tarantino films, and this is where the grindhousey thing kicks in. It's taken to such ludicrous levels and extremes that you can almost distance yourself from an exploding head of some form. You know, the blood and the gore, sometimes when it's so ludicrously real and extreme, it kind of, I don't know, it just doesn't affect you. Yeah, so all in all, I would say, if you're a horror fan, you've got to pop this on your list. It's got to be there. You've got to tick it off. You've got to say you've seen it. If you're not into horror or anything like that, don't watch it. There's good gags in there. And I have to say a particular shout out to Brittany Snow. I thought she was fantastic. She's the sort of main porn actress. And I just thought she just brought a sort of maturity to it. If I had one major criticism of this film, it would be that actually the characters were so well drawn, their relationships were brilliant, that the stresses between, like, say, the crew, the Jenna Ortega character, her boyfriend wanting to sort of feeling a bit distant, and then the sex performers, and then the producer, it was a really rich and authentic connection between all of them. And I think that in a sense, the film got hung up on getting the horror through the camera lens quickly. Let's get to the horror, let's get to the horror. But I thought that they had a lot more opportunity with these characters to build tension between them, to build loyalties between them, and to almost riff on that whole idea of, is what we're doing worthwhile in an artistic way? What were the ambitions of the sex? So I didn't really get a sense of what Mia Goth's ambition was. She takes a lot of cocaine, but we get a lot more of a sense from the Brittany Snow character that she wants to be famous and she wants to be that. Mia Goth sort of hovers from scene to scene to scene. And there was one particular scene where they're all sat around in the barn, and Jenna Ortega, the boom operator, says, "You know what? I fancy doing this too. I want to be in the film." And a cameraman boyfriend isn't happy about that because he's making art, but it's all right if it's art with someone else in it. And I just thought scenes like that, we could have had more scenes. It could have slowed down a little bit, and we could have sat with these characters because they were all really good actors, really good performances, really rich relationships. And it kind of threw that away in preference for the gore fest and really ticking the boxes of the horror genre. But that said, I think if you want to go out on a Saturday, Friday night Get a couple of beers in, roar with laughter. It's a little bit sexy too. If you're with your partner, whatever, you know, you'll have a good time.
For more film and family fun, don't forget to click the subscribe button and make sure to click the bell to never miss an update.